Your Honor, this fake hero can't even walk straight, let alone drive safely.
Sir, every word he says is a lie. But I've faced worse enemies than these perverts.
Cop laughs at disabled veteran in court, but has no idea who's about to walk in. Your Honor, this fake hero can barely walk straight, let alone drive safely. Officer Bradley smirked at disabled veteran Tommy Chen in his wheelchair, pointing dismissively. Another PTSD case looking for sympathy. Bradley had no idea the new judge entering chambers was Tommy's former commanding officer from Afghanistan. Former Corporal Tommy Chen, 28, lost both legs, saving his squad from an IED blast. This bogus DUI case threatened his disability benefits, his job, his independence. The corrupt cop's lies could destroy everything he'd rebuilt since coming home broken. Judge Sarah Martinez adjusted her robes, recognizing the voice mocking her former Marine. 15 minutes until court convened, enough time to review the case that would end one career and vindicate a hero she'd once led into battle. Corporal Tommy Chen, enlisted at 19, drawn by family tradition and the promise of college funding that his immigrant parents couldn't provide. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan's Helmand province, with the 2nd Marines earning the respect of hardened veterans who appreciated his mechanical skills and unwavering courage under fire. The IED blast that ended his career occurred during his squad's final patrol, a massive explosion that claimed both legs below the knee but allowed 6 Marines to return home to their families. The Purple Heart and Navy Cross sat on his apartment mantel beside photos of brothers who didn't make it back. 18 months of grueling rehabilitation taught him to walk with prosthetics, but the invisible wounds ran deeper. PTSD, depression, and chronic pain made civilian life a daily battle that required more courage than facing Taliban fighters ever had. His modified Honda Civic represented independence, specially equipped hand controls that allowed him to work, attend school, and live without burdening others with his limitations. Detective Marcus Bradley, 12 years with Phoenix PD, had perfected the art of revenue generation through selective enforcement targeting vulnerable populations. Disabled veterans were particularly profitable. Their conditions made defending against false charges difficult, expensive, and often unsuccessful. Bradley's DUI arrest statistics were impressive, but fabricated. He specialized in targeting veterans leaving VA appointments, claiming their medications or PTSD symptoms constituted impairment. Few challenged his testimony in court, and judges rarely questioned decorated police officers over disabled veterans whose credibility was automatically suspect. What Internal Affairs didn't know: Bradley had never served in the military, washing out of boot camp after 6 days, but claiming veteran status when convenient. Judge Martinez's hidden identity. 60 words. The Honorable Sarah Martinez had been appointed to the bench after 15 years as a Marine Corps JAG officer, including 3 combat deployments where she'd prosecuted war crimes and defended Marines facing unjust charges. Her civilian judicial appointment was unanimously confirmed, but her military background remained largely unknown to local law enforcement personnel who appeared before her court. The arrest report painted Tommy as a dangerous, intoxicated veteran whose erratic behavior necessitated immediate detention. According to Bradley's statement, Tommy had been swerving erratically, showing signs of impairment and becoming combative when questioned about his medication use. The reality was different. Tommy had been parked outside the VA hospital waiting for his prosthetics adjustment appointment when Bradley approached claiming someone had reported suspicious activity. The field sobriety test was impossible for someone with bilateral leg amputations, but Bradley insisted on standard procedures that Tommy couldn't physically perform. "Can't balance on one foot, must be intoxicated," Bradley had written in his report, ignoring the obvious fact that Tommy had no feet to balance on. The breathalyzer showed 0 alcohol, but Bradley claimed Tommy's prescription medications constituted impairment, despite medical documentation proving the medications were necessary for chronic pain management from combat injuries. Another drug-seeking veteran trying to get high on government pills, Bradley told the booking officer loud enough for Tommy to hear. These PTSD cases are all the same addicts and malingerers. The charges included DUI, reckless driving, and resisting arrest felonies that would destroy Tommy's disability benefits and federal employment eligibility. The preliminary hearing showcased Bradley's courtroom theatrics perfected through years of successful prosecutions against defendants who couldn't afford adequate legal representation. Tommy sat in his wheelchair beside his overworked public defender, watching Bradley perform for an audience that included other officers learning his methods. "Your Honor, the defendant claims his war injuries excuse his reckless behavior, but responsibility doesn't end with military service," Bradley testified with dramatic conviction. His medical records show extensive psychiatric treatment, multiple medications, and documented behavioral issues consistent with substance abuse. Tommy's hands clenched his wheelchair armrests as Bradley continued fabricating details that bore no resemblance to the actual arrest. Every word was calculated to portray him as a dangerous, unstable veteran whose military service was irrelevant to civilian law violations. These veterans think their service entitles them to special treatment, but the law applies equally to everyone, even fake heroes looking for sympathy. The packed courtroom included other officers taking notes on Bradley's successful prosecution techniques, treating the hearing as a training seminar on revenue generation through veteran targeting. Tommy maintained military bearing despite the character assassination unfolding before him. Years of Marine Corps discipline taught him to endure without breaking, even when facing injustice that wounded deeper than Taliban bullets ever had. His public defender, overwhelmed with cases and lacking military knowledge, could only object weakly to Bradley's most egregious fabrications. The prosecutor painted Tommy as another troubled veteran whose military service was a convenient excuse for criminal behavior. "Corporal Chen, can you respond to Officer Bradley's testimony?" his lawyer asked hesitantly. Tommy looked directly at Bradley with the same unflinching stare he'd used scanning for IEDs on Afghan highways. "Every word is a lie, sir, but I've faced worse enemies than corrupt cops." The courtroom erupted with Bradley's supporters laughing at what they perceived as delusional bravado from a broken veteran. But something in Tommy's, bearing the unwavering spine, the steady voice, the controlled anger, reminded observers of soldiers who'd seen real combat. "We'll see about that, hero," Bradley sneered, confident in his coming victory. The bailiff's voice cut through the noise. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Martinez." Judge Sarah Martinez entered her courtroom with the measured pace of someone accustomed to life and death decisions made under fire. 23 years of military service, from enlisted Marine to JAG Colonel, had taught her to assess situations quickly and act decisively when justice was threatened. She surveyed the courtroom with tactical awareness, noting the packed gallery of police officers, the wheelchair-bound defendant, and the confident prosecutor whose voice she'd heard mocking a disabled veteran from her chambers. When her eyes met, Tommy's recognition was immediate and mutual. Corporal Thomas Chen, 2nd Marines, Helmand Province, 2019, the young mechanic who'd kept their vehicles running despite Taliban harassment, who'd volunteered for the most dangerous patrols, who'd thrown himself on an IED to save 6 Marines she'd recommended for medals herself. Martinez had written Tommy's Purple Heart and Navy Cross citations, personally documenting heroism that officially saved 6 lives and unofficially saved dozens more through his mechanical expertise that kept Marine vehicles operational in hostile territory. The broken veteran in the wheelchair was the same Marine who'd once asked her legal advice about sending money home to his parents, worried that his family's immigrant status might cause problems for his military career. Now, he sat facing fabricated charges from a corrupt cop who was about to learn what happened when someone attacked her Marines. During the brief recess, Judge Martinez reviewed Tommy's case file with the analytical precision that had made her legendary among military prosecutors and defense attorneys alike. 23 years of military legal experience revealed inconsistencies that civilian attorneys might miss. The arrest report contained procedural violations that would have resulted in court-martial proceedings in military justice systems. Bradley's statement claimed field sobriety tests that were physically impossible for bilateral amputees, evidence of either criminal incompetence or deliberate fabrication. Medical records showed Tommy's medications were prescribed for combat-related injuries and taken exactly as directed. No evidence supported impairment claims beyond Bradley's unsubstantiated testimony. Security footage from the VA hospital showed Tommy's vehicle parked legally in a disabled veteran space, contradicting Bradley's claims of erratic driving. The timestamp proved Tommy had been stationary for 40 minutes before Bradley's suspicious activity contact. Martinez's military network provided additional intelligence. Bradley had arrested 17 disabled veterans in similar circumstances over 6 months, generating department revenue through fine collections and property forfeitures that disproportionately targeted vulnerable populations. The pattern suggested systematic civil rights violations that federal authorities should investigate immediately. Judge Martinez activated networks that most civilian judges would never access: military legal contacts who specialized in veteran rights violations and federal prosecutors who handled systematic police corruption cases. Her secure call to the FBI Civil Rights Division provided context that transformed a simple DUI case into potential federal criminal conspiracy investigation. Bradley's pattern of targeting disabled veterans constituted systematic deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal felony, carrying significant prison sentences. The JAG network confirmed Tommy's service record, combat decorations, and exemplary conduct throughout his military career. His medical retirement was honorable, his disability rating was legitimate, and his post-service conduct was exemplary. Martinez also contacted the VA's Inspector General, whose office investigated fraud and abuse targeting disabled veterans. Bradley's systematic targeting represented exactly the predatory behavior that federal oversight was designed to prevent and prosecute. When court reconvened, the dynamic would be fundamentally different. Bradley expected to face an overwhelmed public defender and a sympathetic civilian judge impressed by police testimony. Instead, he would face a combat veteran federal judge with military legal training, federal connections, and personal knowledge of the hero he was attempting to frame. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and justice would be served with military precision. Officer Bradley, before we continue with your testimony, I'd like to clarify some procedural issues with your arrest report. Judge Martinez's voice carried the authority of someone who'd prosecuted war criminals and defended innocent Marines against false charges. Yes, Your Honor, Bradley replied confidently, expecting routine questions that would reinforce his fabricated narrative. You administered field sobriety tests to a bilateral amputee. Explain the legal and procedural basis for tests that require physical capabilities the defendant obviously lacks. Bradley's confidence wavered slightly. Your Honor, standard protocol requires... I'm familiar with protocol, officer. I spent 15 years as a Marine Corps JAG officer prosecuting cases involving evidence fabrication. Your report claims tests that are physically impossible for this defendant to perform. That suggests either criminal incompetence or deliberate perjury. The courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. Bradley realized he was facing someone with legal and military experience that exceeded his usual opponents by orders of magnitude. Furthermore, Officer Bradley, I personally know this defendant. Corporal Tommy Chen served under my command in Afghanistan, where he earned the Navy Cross for actions that saved 6 Marines' lives. His sacrifice cost him both legs, but saved American soldiers who returned home to their families. Tommy straightened in his wheelchair, recognition and hope, replacing the despair that had marked his expression throughout Bradley's testimony. Your Honor, I didn't realize you had prior contact with the defendant. Prior contact, Officer Bradley. I wrote his combat decoration citations. I recommended him for promotion. I know his character, his service record, and his integrity better than you know your own badge number. Judge Martinez methodically dismantled Bradley's fabricated case with surgical precision that impressed the legal observers present and terrified the police officers who'd been taking notes on his prosecution techniques. Officer Bradley, your report states the defendant was swerving erratically and driving recklessly. Security footage from the VA hospital shows his vehicle parked legally in a disabled veteran space for 40 minutes before your contact. Explain this discrepancy. Bradley stammered, unprepared for evidence he hadn't known existed. Your Honor, my observation was based on... Your observation was fabricated, officer. The timestamp proves your statement is false. Continue lying under oath, and perjury charges will be added to your growing legal problems. The prosecutor, realizing the case was collapsing spectacularly, attempted damage control. Your Honor, perhaps, Officer Bradley's memory errors don't explain systematic fabrication. Officer Bradley claims medication impairment despite 0 blood alcohol and prescribed medications taken exactly as directed for combat-related injuries. He administered impossible field sobriety tests, then claimed failure, proved intoxication. This isn't poor police work, it's criminal fraud. Martinez turned to the packed gallery of police officers. Gentlemen, you're witnessing how fabricated evidence destroys careers. Officer Bradley's methods will result in federal investigation, criminal charges, and civil rights violations that will bankrupt both him personally and this department institutionally. The courtroom fell silent as officers realized they were witnessing their colleagues' professional destruction rather than a successful prosecution seminar. Bailiff contact the FBI's Civil Rights Division and request immediate response for systematic civil rights violations under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 242. Also, contact the VA Inspector General regarding systematic fraud targeting disabled veterans. Bradley went pale as he realized the magnitude of his legal exposure. Federal civil rights charges carried prison sentences that would destroy his life completely. Officer Bradley, you are hereby ordered to surrender your weapon and badge to court security. You're suspended from all law enforcement duties pending federal investigation into civil rights violations, evidence fabrication, and systematic fraud targeting protected classes. Tommy watched in amazement as the corrupt cop who'd mocked his service faced the same justice system he'd tried to manipulate. Federal agents were already responding to Judge Martinez's request, prepared to investigate Bradley's pattern of targeting disabled veterans. Corporal Chen, all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. Your service record speaks to your character better than any testimony this court could hear. Additionally, I'm ordering a federal investigation into systematic harassment of disabled veterans by law enforcement personnel in this jurisdiction. Martinez's voice carried across the silent courtroom with command authority that made grown men stand straighter. Some badges protect and serve, others prey on those who've already sacrificed everything for America. Today, we determine which type of officer stands before this court. Within 6 hours, Marcus Bradley was terminated from Phoenix PD, criminally charged with federal civil rights violations and facing civil lawsuits from 17 disabled veterans whose cases were reopened based on Judge Martinez's findings. His fabricated arrest reports became evidence in federal prosecution for systematic deprivation of rights under color of law charges, carrying up to 10 years imprisonment and complete forfeiture of law enforcement pension benefits. Tommy's story spread through veteran networks nationwide, inspiring disabled veterans to report similar harassment and seek justice through proper legal channels supported by veteran advocacy organizations. The city settled Tommy's civil rights lawsuit for $340,000 plus coverage for all his medical expenses and compensation for emotional trauma inflicted through systematic harassment disguised as law enforcement. Most importantly, Tommy's honor was restored publicly with Judge Martinez's testimony about his combat heroics documented in court records that would follow him forever as vindication rather than false accusations. The Martinez-Chen Protocol became mandatory training for law enforcement agencies receiving federal funding. Police officers nationwide learned proper procedures for interacting with disabled veterans, recognizing service-connected conditions, and avoiding discriminatory enforcement practices. 29 states adopted legislation specifically protecting disabled veterans from harassment, with enhanced penalties for law enforcement personnel who targeted vulnerable populations for revenue generation rather than legitimate public safety concerns. Tommy became a federal consultant training police departments on veteran recognition and proper accommodation for service-connected disabilities. His presentations reached thousands of officers, building bridges between law enforcement and veteran communities. The VA established partnerships with federal prosecutors to investigate systematic fraud targeting disabled veterans, creating rapid response protocols when predatory practices were identified. Federal oversight ensured that veterans who'd sacrificed for America weren't victimized by those sworn to protect them in civilian communities. Judge Martinez established veteran mentorship programs connecting former military personnel transitioning to civilian careers with legal professionals who understood their unique challenges and capabilities. Tommy completed his mechanical engineering degree, specializing in adaptive technology for disabled veterans. His innovations helped thousands of veterans achieve independence through equipment modifications that addressed service-connected limitations. The courtroom, where Bradley had mocked his service, became a symbol of justice for veterans nationwide, proving that military brotherhood extended into civilian institutions when former service members achieved positions of authority. Tommy's wheelchair became a platform for advocacy, rather than a symbol of limitation, demonstrating that disability couldn't diminish the honor earned through military service or the dignity deserved by those who'd sacrificed for America. The brotherhood forged in combat continued in courtrooms, legislative chambers, and civilian institutions where veterans supported each other against those who would exploit their service-connected vulnerabilities. The Chen precedent revolutionized law enforcement interaction with disabled veterans nationwide. Federal agencies created oversight positions specifically monitoring civil rights compliance in veteran-related enforcement actions. Tommy addressed judicial conferences monthly. Service-connected disabilities aren't character flaws or criminal tendencies. They're badges of honor earned through sacrifice for America. The National Association of Police Chiefs developed training protocols recognizing service-connected conditions, proper accommodation procedures, and federal legal protections governing veteran interactions with law enforcement. Federal funding required agencies to demonstrate compliance with veteran protection standards, ensuring that discriminatory practices resulted in immediate loss of government support. Courts nationwide adopted Martinez Protocol procedures for cases involving disabled veterans, providing enhanced scrutiny and federal oversight when patterns of discriminatory enforcement were identified. Tommy Chen discovered that his combat sacrifice, once mocked in courtroom humiliation, became the foundation for protecting thousands of disabled veterans facing similar injustice. His engineering work developed adaptive technologies that helped disabled veterans achieve independence, employment, and dignity in civilian communities that sometimes failed to recognize their contributions. The courthouse, where Bradley had destroyed his character, now features his portrait in the Veteran Advocacy Center, representing triumph over systematic oppression through military brotherhood and judicial integrity. Tommy drives his modified Honda daily through Phoenix streets, knowing that his sacrifice in Afghanistan and his victory in court protected countless veterans from predators wearing badges instead of enemy uniforms. The Chen case proved that military brotherhood transcends service periods, extending into civilian institutions where former service members defend each other against systematic oppression and discrimination. Tommy learned that the same courage required for combat service was needed for civilian justice, standing against corruption even when facing overwhelming odds and institutional bias. Honor earned in service cannot be diminished by civilian corruption. When brothers and sisters achieve positions of authority, they defend those who served with the same ferocity they showed defending America overseas. In the end, Tommy Chen learned that the same brothers and sisters who would have died for him in Afghanistan were equally prepared to defend him in American courtrooms. The uniform changes, but the oath to protect each other remains eternal.